Well, thank you very much for choosing this workshop. I'm just going to leave another couple of seconds for people to join because it is difficult to get from one session to the next. So I'll just leave another minute or so for people to do that. Okay, numbers have stabilised at 30, so that's great that 30 of you have actually chosen the workshop. And as Ava introduced earlier on, I've been very involved in the project right from the start. So I've been the project leader for the UK team, and my colleague Siobhan Neary is with us today and providing a workshop, but we also had a team of other researchers supporting us, and one of the things that I was responsible for really was leading the international research part of the project, and it's been fascinating really working with a pan-European team. And what I want to do today is to talk about some of the findings of that research, particularly around the use of information, and to think about ways that we can actually support people to use information more effectively. And as I will show later on in the handbook that we're going to launch later on today, there is actually an article about this approach that I'm going to introduce to you, and of course you'll have the slides as well. But what I'm going to cover here, first of all, is a definition of career and labour market information. I'm going to touch on the research data about where young people go for this information. There are going to be some consideration of the ethical issues which confront practitioners when they are developing and using information. I'm going to introduce this framework for assessing the quality of information. We're going to think about how this might be used in career guidance, and I'm going to highlight some further reading. So let's start with a definition then, because obviously we have across the UK a number of different ways of thinking about careers information. Whoops, gone on. And I just wanted to try and provide us with some kind of definition here. So one of the things that happens with career and labour market information is that it gets abbreviated, and this is a particular problem in the UK, I think, where we use acronyms all the while in career development, and we need to actually stop and think what this means. So in the UK, we talk about CLMI, career and labour market information. It's very reductionist, this, and it fails to represent the complexity of the intervention and the skills and knowledge required to provide this appropriately and effectively. And sometimes we actually talk about labour market intelligence instead of information, but how do these terms differ? So let's think about this in a little bit more detail. What does it actually cover, career and labour market information? Well, this is information about the structure of the labour market, a profile of the workforce, some trends around employment and unemployment, the functioning of the labour market, pathways, occupational pathways and progression, issues of equality and diversity, pay, opportunities and vacancies, information about occupations, and information on the skills requirements for these types of roles. So a big long list here of information items which are going to be very, very important to individuals as they approach career decision making. However, that's not just the end of the story, because in terms of the career part, there are some other issues to consider. So, for example, information on grants and funding can be really important. Issues around access to social and healthcare support, travel information, for example, on gap years, information about childcare, because we do know that some people need to secure childcare if they're going to make the most of learning and work opportunities. Also, some information about leisure activities and clubs and opportunities to practice skills and develop skills, and of course, volunteering. So these are all part of the information provision that we need to make. So in terms of intelligence, I did pick up what does that mean? What is the difference? Well, usually we think of labour market information as all of the things that I put, career and labour market information. But when we use intelligence instead of information, this is really around how this applies to individual circumstances. So this can be, you know, directly related to their needs. So let's progress on to the data then, which was an important part of the research that we conducted. And the first interesting thing to say was, you know, when do young people start thinking about their careers? Now, this is important because if we know when they start thinking about careers, then we can start to make information interventions at the right time. And when we asked this question of young people, we found that although the bulk of young people start thinking about this between the ages of 12 and 14, there are significant numbers of young people who are beginning to think about this earlier than that. So if you look at this little graph here, it shows with all of the different countries the age that starts, but you can see across our partners there is a trend, and certainly in that primary phase between the ages of 8 and 11, there's some significant thinking needing to is taking place. And one of the interesting things about this graph as well, it shows that actually by the time young people get to 15 and 16, well, there are not so many who are just starting that process. You know, by then most people have made some inroads into their thinking. So what informs young people's career decisions? Well, this graph, complex as it is, talks about the fact that 78.3% of European 14-year-olds use the internet to support their career decision making. So you can see that's the bottom line. It's not the biggest. We know parents and carers are a very big influence here as well, and we will pick that up later in this conference. But the internet does present most young people with a source of information. And of course, we know that that is fraught with difficulties. So we also know that by age, there's a difference as well. And that at age 12 and 13, you're seeing significant numbers of young people using the internet to support their career thinking. This does vary across the age groups, and certainly at age 14, that is the biggest percentage of young people using the internet. But you can see this is still a very, very big proportion by each age group compared to, for example, books and leaflets or a library. We also conducted focus groups during the research, and there are a couple of quotations here which show how the internet is being used. So they use Google a lot. And one of the things that one young person from Spain, a 15-year-old, told us was, well, you search online, for example, universities where you can study for a specific degree. So at age 15 already, this young person is looking at university opportunities. So another Spanish young person, another Spanish young lady, said that she looked it up on the internet because her parents didn't study for a degree or anything. So I looked on my own, and the truth is that it helped me a lot. But of course, this isn't without its drawbacks. And one 15-year-old male student who wanted to become a farmer as part of his progression pathway explained, I saw something on Facebook the other day. It asked questions and then told you what job to do. It said 95% sure I should be a farmer. Now, another one noted the impact of TV on her career thinking. And she said, he said, ever since I was a child, I've always liked police films, and I was hooked on several. The truth is that I really liked a character who was a national police officer, and it became clear then that I wanted to be a police officer too. Now, of course, both of these quotes should raise alarm bells for practitioners, because hidden within these quotes are some danger signs. Now, In terms of what guidance exists for practitioners in terms of the use of information, I can talk much about in the UK and the Gatsby benchmarks of good career guidance. There's a list of references at the end of this, and it's freely available, this document, which was written in 2014 and has become a real kind of backbone, if you like, of English career guidance in schools and colleges. And in the document, the benchmarks stipulate that every pupil and their parents should have access to good quality information about future study options and labour market opportunities. And they will need the support of an informed advisor to make the best use of this information. So you've got information there and then the application of that so it becomes intelligence. By the age of 14, all pupils should have accessed and used information about career paths and the labour market to inform their own decisions on study options. And parents should be encouraged to access and use information about labour markets and future study options to inform their career support to their children. Certainly, both in the UK and in other partner countries, there's often a reference to information being impartial and free from bias. However, practitioners cannot select all information which young people have access to, and nor should they. This isn't our job to mediate all information that young people have access to. We can't do that. But of course, it does raise some particular questions. And there are some ethical issues around the provision of information. So the moral principles which guide the provision of information include the need to be impartial, transparent and trustworthy. And these kind of moral principles, if you like, are set out in the UK in the Career Development Institute's Code of Ethical Practice. However, it's quite possible to provide access to a range of information materials, but remain partial. And in 2019, I wrote an article which looked at the work of Thaler and Sunstein, who developed the nudge theory, to explore how lessons from behavioural economics can be applied to the provision of career and labour market information. And one of the things I noted in that article was that it's quite possible to place information strategically in order to influence young people's choices while still providing a full range of information. So the example that I give is that it would be quite possible to put elite university prospectuses in the eye line, pretty much like they put sweets at the supermarket in the eye line of young people, and to put the non-preferred university prospectuses out of the line of sight, maybe on the bottom shelf, or maybe put prospectuses or information about higher education in sight and maybe apprenticeships or other options lower down and out of sight. So young people have to actually work hard to find that. Now, strictly in the lines of kind of the provision of information, you meet the requirements, but morally and ethically, I think you would possibly agree that using behavioural economics and lessons from that to nudge people in the right direction as you see it is not really an ethical approach. So there are some other things that we need to consider as well. So we've heard an awful lot in the international media about fake news and how fake news has influenced decisions which citizens have made in elections and other political events. And the headlines have reinforced the need for people to ask questions about the sources and intent of the information that they encounter, particularly through social media and other online sources. And the same principles apply to the provision of career and labour market information, and leads us to the conclusion that we can educate young people to be more discerning users of information. So, what does that mean? Well, the research has shown us that young people are accessing information and that they're doing that quite early. We also know that schools are required to make the provision of information to young people and their parents. But is this enough for us to deduce that young people and their parents are using information effectively? Probably not. Where, for example, do we teach information handling skills to young people and their parents? And how do we know that they're using impartial information, which is free from bias? These are questions that should trouble all practitioners of career guidance because, as I said earlier, we are not in the business of selecting all information for young people. There are some ethical issues around that approach in its own right. So there's do that for young people and their parents, then we need to make sure that they've got the skills that they need to make discerning use of the information that's available. And here's an amusing image, a comic image that I found on the internet with this young person having failed his assessment and going, "What do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet." And of course, there is an absolute danger here. We need to be in a position to educate young people to use information effectively. So I want to go on and introduce the CRAP test. Now, I apologise for the acronym. It's not my design, I have to say, and I'm sorry if that offends anybody. It's not meant to. I'm going to go through the acronym and explain what each of those letters means and explain how we can use this in practice. So actually, choosing accurate and trustworthy information, as I've already said, is critical in making well-informed career decisions. But it's very hard to, particularly for young people, to know which information is valid and which needs to be rejected as unhelpful. Now, the CRAP test was introduced by Sarah Blakesley from the California State University in 2004. And you can use it yourself as a practitioner or use it to educate young people about how to evaluate both online and paper-based resources. And I particularly like this framework. It's quite simple and it could actually be used as a basis for a lesson on career and labour market information handling skills. So don't just teach where information is available, but teach young people how to select and use it effectively. So what do these stand for, these letters? So the first one, C, is about currency, and this is about the timeliness of information. And what we need to encourage young people to ask is, what date was this resource published? And have I got the most recent edition? Now, I think many of us search widely for information on the internet for all sorts of different reasons, but it is quite irksome when you find that the information that you've been relying on is actually 10 years out of date and it's been replaced by more modern information. And one of the things it reminds me of is that everything I publish, I need to put a date on so people can make use of that. But also we need to get young people to ask questions, particularly on internet content, because books often have a date on them. Internet content often doesn't, and we need to encourage young people to look behind what's going on there. Now, R stands for relevance, or how the information meets a particular information need. And we need to be encouraging young people to ask, is this information directly related to my question, or is it more general in nature? And have I found this information as a direct result of my research, or did I find this by accident? Now, I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the whole business of internet surfing and how easy it is to get drawn down pathways by following links and then additional links and links and links. It goes on. But we need to make sure that young people are focused on the actual question that they need the answer to. Sometimes doing that reveals new options and opportunities, but in the first instance, they do need to answer the questions so that they're very focused, and that is the point of this particular part of the acronym. A stands for authority, and this is about the source of information. And we need to encourage young people to ask, who's produced the resource? Is it a company or a person that I recognise and trust? Have other people that I know used the resource? Has someone that I trust signposted me to this information? Certainly in other bits of research that I've done, I've asked young people, well, how do you know this is a trustworthy source? And they've often said, well, you know, it was on our school careers website or what have you, or, you know, somebody like the careers advisor or the careers teacher have signposted this, so I knew I could trust it. You know, so getting them to stop and think. Some of the other things are around, you know, is there a vested interest in that company or person in promoting those messages? We need to get them to think about that as well. The second A stands for accuracy, and this is about the reliability, truthfulness and correctness of the information. And we need to get young people to start asking questions like, are the facts presented in this information replicated elsewhere in reliable sources? So kind of triangulating the information so they know that it's okay. And is there any critique about this information anywhere? What are people saying about this? And certainly there are lots of ways of looking for that sort of thing. You know, certainly in some sources, there are comment sections underneath where people can post comments and kind of grading systems when people find this information helpful, etc. So get them to start looking into that sort of thing as well. And finally, the purpose. So the reason the information exists, and we need to ask young people to think about the agenda behind the information. So I alluded to this earlier on. You know, is there a particular reason? So is this a government agenda about sort of focusing on STEM? Well, that's okay. Science, technology, engineering and maths subjects are all ones that are in short supply, but we also know that there are skill shortages in the arts as well. So, you know, we do need to make sure that young people are looking at balanced information and making sure that, you know, individuals or groups' agendas are not colouring their decision making. We also need to think about whether the information is supporting the interests of any one group. There are plenty of examples there around, you know, focused information, and we need to open young people's eyes to that. And if it's sponsored, for example, by whom, and do they have an agenda? So there are plenty of organisations who are trying to promote their products. Adults are continually plagued by this as they're on the internet, but, you know, we do need to open young people's eyes to that as well. So lots of questions, and anecdotally, I can tell you that when I first became a careers advisor and the internet was quite new, I was searching for information to support some young people who wanted to go into veterinary science. And I, you know, in my new way, I was searching on the internet and I came up with a really engaging little video about, you know, working as a veterinary nurse, and it looked really great. And then I had to stop and remind myself that actually this had been made by somebody in the United States, and some of the language and the terms and the qualifications were not appropriate for my client group. And I shook myself up and reminded myself it was really important to make sure that the information that I was providing, you know, was all of these things, that it was accurate, it was timely, and it was free from bias, or the purposes were, you know, sort of okay for the client group that I was working with. So we can all be drawn into the trap. Now, of course, in these slides, I've talked about encouraging young people to ask questions, but of course, these are also the sort of questions we need to encourage parents to ask. And also the teachers in schools who are doing such a sterling job in supporting young people to think about the application of individual curriculum subjects to career decision making as well. You know, we do need to help them have this kind of framework for interrogating the information that they're passing on as well. They're not specialists in career guidance, but we ask them to support us in our role, and therefore they need these information handling skills as well. So I did tell you that in the book, I put it in capital letters because this is how it's been referred to in the project. There is an article on this support for developing information handling skills. And in that article, I do cover a number of the issues that I've talked about today. So you'll be able to follow that up. And it does have some information about the CRAP test there that you can use as well in your lessons and in your practice. So please feel that you can use that. And here I've got the exemplar that I have provided as well. So it's got the acronym down the left, it's got the definition of that acronym, and then the questions to ask and the responses. So you could actually use this worksheet either in training for teachers or to maybe use or adapt with young people as well. Finally, I would not be doing my job properly if I didn't actually signpost you to this event in the United Kingdom. You can book onto the National Career Leaders Conference, and some of the things we will be teasing out there are issues around information handling skills. And so if you're interested in continuing the dialogue, please feel that you can book onto that event as well, where we can continue the talking. So here are my references, and of course some of these are books and some of these are available online. I do kind of suggest that you have a look at some of these as you go forward and start to think about how you can develop your own information handling skills and those of your supporters, professional supporters, and the young people and the parents that we're working with. So I think that is the end of my presentation, and I'm really happy to take questions. If you want to continue the dialogue after the conference is over and you want to talk to me about any of these things, there's my email address. I'm more than happy to chat to you, but I'm also going to be really happy to take some questions, I think, as well in this workshop. So I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen. There we go. And I can see there's some things in the chat. So I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. Okay, so the questions in the chat facility all relate to technical issues, but I guess because there are only around 30 odd people in the workshop, if anybody wants to ask a question by unmuting their mic, I'm more than happy to deal with it that way. Or if you wish to put a link, a question into the chat, then now would be the time to do it. I suppose I can open the discussion with a question myself. What are your experiences of young people using information from the internet, for example? Do you find that they're overwhelmed by information, or do they already have some information handling skills? What do you think? Okay, everybody's gone really silent. Have a little think about that question.
May I?
Okay, thank you. Do you want to just introduce yourself and say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, my name is Ahmed Helmi. I'm from Egypt, so I'm outside of the European countries and the interest, but actually I'm interested in the topic. And as you see, I'm a founder of an organization called CAT, Career Advisory Tools International. I can consider myself as international expert in career guidance, basically in the Arab countries and some other Balkani countries.
Thank you for joining the conference. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'd like to reflect on my country because, and also maybe in the Arab countries, actually, we have a lot of information, but it's scattered. So this is another challenge I can add to the labor market information being too many, but also scattered, which is make it more challenging for our young people. So our kids are really suffering from this because they cannot use even. So thank you so much for the concept of handling the labor market information, because also we never thought that handling information, labor market information in particular is useful for decision making. Yeah, so maybe I don't have enough solutions for this, but at least the questions has been presented by the CRAP tool is nice and is a good starting point for thinking of the whole issue of handling labor market information. So thank you.
Oh, I'm glad that that's been useful, and I think there is a shift of thinking here, isn't there, from just providing a wealth of information, and I think schools and practitioners go out of their way to develop excellent resources. So there's no doubt in my mind that there's plenty of good work being done there, but this takes it beyond just the provision of information, and really demands that practitioners stand back and think, you know, how are young people going to use this? And I think, you know, in other research that I've done, I did some research, I think it was 2012 actually, so it's quite a long while ago, but we looked at the vocabulary that young people were using. And one of the questions that emerged from that was, how can we expect young people to use information if they haven't got the basic vocabulary in order to interrogate that? So if they don't really understand the meaning of the word job, skills, work, college, university, and let's face it, some of the kids in the research for this project have been using information very, very early on. You know, like if they haven't got the basic vocabulary, how can they be effective in their use of information? It's a simple question, but it's certainly meant that early school year practitioners have started to do work around making sure that kids have got the building blocks that they can then use to apply for information use. And the other thing that's happening is that information handling skills is starting to appear as well. I do think it's a challenge, because I don't necessarily think that career practitioners are the only people that can do this. So information handling skills can happen in other parts of the school curriculum, but then it needs to be drawn into career development. So young people need to know that if they're doing information handling skills for language learning, for example, that they also need to apply that in career development terms as well. So yes, a lot of work to be doing, I think, and thank you for highlighting that kind of shift. Thank you. I wonder if there's anybody else that would like to come into this debate. I'd like you to be brave. You don't have to jump in, because I can't see everybody on the screen at the moment. So just flick your microphone on if you want to say something. Oh, so I can see in the chat here, a colleague, Pernilla from Sweden, is talking about the fact that information handling starts quite early. Pernilla, I wonder if you can just say how early is early, at what age does that start? Just put it in the chat if you don't want to speak openly. I'd be quite...
Hello. Well, I'm not working in the school. I'm actually working at the university, but I have kids myself. And so I've noticed over the last few years that they do start very early with this information handling. And I would say probably at least from, I want to say like maybe 9 years old or something like that, 10 years old. And they're very meticulous about that. The teachers are, whenever they're doing any type of project, that they go through these pretty much like the CRAP test, actually, the questions about their information sources. So I feel like in the schools here, this is not then concerning career guidance or anything like that, just general in the school curriculums, but that this is definitely something that they're working on here.
That's interesting. And I wonder, it sounds maybe you won't know the answer to this question, but if there are any other Swedish colleagues here, I wonder if they see evidence that that's translated into career research as well. Are the young people transferring those skills from other parts of the curriculum into career research?
Yeah, I really can't answer that. I wouldn't know, but maybe someone else knows.
It'd be interesting to know whether information handling skills are part of the transferable skills that we often talk about.
Yeah.
I'm also from Sweden.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. Okay.
Hi, I'm Teresa, and I can confirm what Pernilla just said. I also have kids in the age 14 and 17, and in school it's a very important skill they learn, that they are critical about the sources they use in all kinds of assignments. And I think it's so because it's being incorporated at school, it becomes like a life skill. So I haven't seen yet that my kids have applied when they look for jobs or university, but I think they use it without knowing it. And
Right.
we as a parent are also making them aware, okay, where did you read that? Is it reliable? So it comes from lots of directions. It comes from school, but it also comes from home, because it's so very important in this time.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like great practice, Teresa, and it's really encouraging to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder whether any of our other colleagues from other countries can comment on whether they experience similar things, or whether, you know, there's still work to be done there. What examples have we got? Okay. What I'm interested in knowing is, for those of you that haven't seen the CRAP test before, how you think you might take that forward into your practice. How will you use it? Again, type into the chat or open your microphone and start talking. How will you use the CRAP test? So that's interesting. Another comment from Sweden here about it's great that young people are being supported to use information effectively, but there's still a gap with adults, and there are some processes being put in place here in order to support adults to develop information handling skills. Now, I think that's super interesting, because one of the things that we found in our work in the project around parental engagement was that, you know, parents don't always have the confidence to support their children in career thinking, and that there are skills and knowledge that they need to develop, and information handling skills are certainly skills that we need to think about with parents as well. Okay, any more questions then? Because I'm quite happy to end this now and give you a break until 1:15 when you'll need to rejoin the main room. But if there's anything else, I'll stay here for a little while. If you want to sort of leave now, then that's fine. If you want to stay and chat, I'll stay here for a few more minutes and take any questions. I do know that you're all going to get the slides, so you'll be able to use the information in those slides as well, the references and what have you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think after sharing the presentation and looking to the resources, I think me personally, I can get back to you. So thank you for the invitation.
No, that's great. No problem. Please do. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, may I have a question finally?
Of course, yes, please, yes. Is it Lucy?
Yeah, I'm Lucy. I'm from Czech Republic aspect. Maybe I have got a little bit more general question. It's not related to the sources, but it was interesting for me to read about the survey. What influences, what are the current influences on choice of vocation or profession, and it came into my mind, if you can answer me, do you see that there are some changes in the role of parents? I mean, when you look into the past, if it's possible. Of course, I know that your research was currently happening in past months, but maybe you have some ideas about the situation in England, because now it's visible that internet is having more bigger role. But if you could compare it to some previous years, or I mean periods, maybe, I would be grateful for your input. Thank you.
It's an interesting question, actually. So I think that the role of parents has changed somewhat. I think if you read the whole report, and we've published the main report, you'll find an awful lot of answers to those questions.
Okay.
But I think the pandemic has actually shone a light on the role of parents in new ways, actually. Because I think they've been very much more a part of their kids' education than previously. So they've often been quite a bystander in that, so an observer of their education, rather than an absolutely critical and practical part of that. And I think the pandemic has changed that. I think parents have suddenly become educators, and for some of them that's been really hard. And for some, they've really enjoyed that. You know, they found a new way of being with their kids. So for sure, we do need to look at that emerging pattern and make sure that we can support parents to do that really well. And I do think, as I said earlier on with Ava, you know, there's a big job of work to do with the catching up agenda, but also that thinking about parents and the role that they play. There's no doubt in my mind that parents play an enormous role. We've known that. But I think perhaps there was very much more direction in the past, and now parents are more open to options. I think that, you know, certainly some cultural groups are opening up to options. And I was talking to my colleague Gideon Arulmani, who's based in India and who does work with parents all over the world. He's going to be speaking at that UK conference that I was talking about, and he's noticed that particularly with migrant and refugee families, their attitudes to this are changing a great deal. So whereas in the past, you know, they would have had very fixed ideas of the types of careers they wanted their kids to follow, he tells me that that is actually changing depending on the country that they make their homes in. You know, they're adopting the practices around that. So for sure that there are some changes happening in parental attitudes, you know, just as part of globalization and the movement of people. So yeah, that's happening too. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. So maybe somehow parents are a little bit more supportive or open to the somehow decision of their children, not so much press to follow what was in the past, if I understood you well, as far as the experience of your colleague concerned.
That's right. I do think that young people need support to challenge their parents' expectations sometimes as well, because I think, you know, there are still young people whose parents have got very fixed ideas of what they want them to do. And if they want to do something different, then the role of the practitioner is to support that young person to make their case with their parents and to explore all the options and the implications for those. And that can be challenging work. It really can.
Thank you for your answer. Thanks.
Oh, well, I hope it's helpful. Thank you. I'm just looking at Madeline's comment here as well. So she's saying that she'll use the CRAP test for herself. So you're actually using it, Madeline, in your guidance practice to help, you know, to structure questions around where the clients have got information. So that's super helpful. And then Sandra, yes, algorithms. Yeah, I actually think you're touching on something really important there. And in fact, I was talking with a colleague who's very knowledgeable about this thing and actually looking at the role that algorithms are playing in terms of influencing young people's career decisions. I think that's a big agenda, really do. So thank you for flagging it, that we do need to help all people understand the role that algorithms play in suggesting information sources. Certainly on Facebook, you know, I get all sorts of different things flagged to me, and funnily enough, they're all in areas that I'm quite interested in. And so if you start to do searches, then algorithms are going to reinforce the outcomes of those searches rather than open up different opportunities. And there is an inherent danger there. So we do need to address that for sure. It's a good question about whether the CRAP test will help us in that. I think it will do, because it actually asks you about the provenance of that information, so where it's come from, what the agenda is, etc. So you could also introduce a question into that framework, which asks around, you know, has the selection of this resource been influenced by an algorithm? You could introduce that question, but of course you need to educate the youngster about what an algorithm is first of all before they can answer that. But yes, an important question. Okay, thank you. Anything else there? This has been a really interesting session. Thank you for all your questions. Okay, so just to remind you all, if you want to leave this session, you will need to join the main session again, and that will be starting at 15:15. So please make sure that you log in through the Zoom link that you've been given. And our colleague who's supporting this workshop has provided you with the link there as well. So please make sure that you do that. And later on, I will be talking with Lenka about the research and the things that we found out about parental engagement, and also introducing a new framework of outcomes for parents. And you'll find that actually that will follow on from this conversation about information. So please make sure that you rejoin us. And thank you for your kind comments and thanks in the chat as well. I appreciate that. Thank you.